A few years ago, there was a talk at one of the atheist conferences by a man. His talk was called "Don't Be a Dick," and he produced what he thought was an absolute slam dunk argument. He said, "How many of you in the audience, if somebody called you an idiot, would change your mind?" And of course, nobody would. But I felt that was a very unfair tactic, because if I tell somebody he's an idiot, and I don't do quite those words, but if the effect of what I'm saying is that he is an idiot, I admit I'm not going to change his mind. But if there are a lot of other people listening in, say it's a radio audience, I mean, you've probably done, I know you've done things where you're talking to one person who probably is an idiot, and yet you know that there are hundreds, thousands of people in the radio audience listening in.
Yep.
You haven't changed the mind of the idiot, but you've probably changed the minds of all the other people who are listening at the same time. And so this is...
It's precisely the situation that I deal with both on the atheist experience and off. I'm not necessarily trying to change the caller's mind, although I'm happy for that to happen. I'm having the conversation for all the people out there who agree, who would have used those same arguments. Because we know that on some occasions, if you can be shown to be wrong, people will sometimes double down, especially if they've made a public profession on behalf of something. This just becomes flat denial. But we also know that through, I don't want to go down the mirror neuron route because you'll probably correct me, but at least with respect to empathy, if you see someone presenting your arguments and they are humiliating themselves, not just, I'm not necessarily humiliating, they're humiliating themselves, this affects that individual who's watching in a way almost as if it had happened to them, and that yet they have the safety of not having been in public humiliated.
Yeah, I might be wired differently here, but I have a different reaction to being called an idiot. If there's
I don't think you're ever called an idiot.
So. No. I mean, well, virtually so. If I guess the source is relevant, but if the source is someone who you find credible on other topics, and that source tells you you're wrong on topic X, that becomes very interesting to me. If Steve Pinker calls me an idiot, I'm very interested, and the offense really has nothing to do with it at that point. So it's more of a sourcing issue, because the people who tend to call you an idiot are usually disconfirm their authority.
When I was an undergraduate, I read The Phenomenon of Man by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and I was completely taken in by it. I thought it was wonderful. And then I read Peter Medawar review of this book. It's the finest negative book review ever written. Read it. And I finished this review and I said, I'm an idiot. I was completely fooled by
that moment of awakening. I've talked before, it's not so much being wrong that affects people, because you think you're right. So it's not like anything to feel that you're wrong. It's the discovery that you're wrong that is sort of the testament of your character. Because for me, finding out that I was wrong is joyous, not that I was wrong, but that I don't have to continue being wrong. That I've made this actual discovery. And there are people who will write in, will say, oh, Matt's wonderful on religion, but terrible on topic X. And without too much exaggeration, I could probably pull up 100 emails, and all of them disagree on what X is. Matt's right about everything except X. I want to get all of them together in a room so they can argue with each other, because every one of those X's is covered by somebody else.
You might be wrong about everything.
I am.
That's just compatible with the data.
At least I can't show that I'm not.
It's interesting psychologically that we all have this experience of being proven wrong, and that's interesting. But I'm more interested in what we do with this sneaking feeling that we might be wrong. I mean, that's psychologically and culturally, that is a far more well-subscribed state of mind, and it's, I think, very consequential. Because, well, obviously, when you're unequivocally wrong, well then, I guess some people manage to ignore this, but there's not a lot to do. I think I just lost. Oh, there we are.
There we go.
But most of us, most of the time, live with opinions that are not so well vetted, and I think it's good to be skeptical of thoughts that come out of your mouth or hit the page or that you find yourself affirming, which if suddenly a very smart expert in the relevant area stood before you and said, well, have you really thought that through? If you break out into a cold sweat at that point, it's worth sort of calibrating your conviction on those points, I think.
I think there's a phrase that I've heard over and over that feeds right into that exact moment. Because theists' arguments, or at least the ones that I deal with on the show frequently, there's almost a script. And my job or my goal most of the time is to get them off the script, because I care more about getting them to think about it rather than parroting what they heard from some apologist. And when you start getting them off the script, seems to me the most common reaction to that, which may be them mulling over the possibility that they could be wrong, is to just say, oh, that was a trick question. There's a defense mechanism there, as if I'm not even sure what a trick question is. I asked you, okay, please explain what you believe and why. What was tricky about that? And yet this seems to be perhaps a defense mechanism that creeps in at those times. I don't know how many others, how many more defense mechanisms like that we might find, but I'm constantly looking for ways to combat them, constantly looking for ways to have a better discussion. Doesn't mean I'm going to have a good discussion with every single person, but if we see these same trends over and over, how do we, or maybe there's no answer, but shouldn't we try to identify those trends in the actual thought processes and attack those perhaps more than the facts surrounding the underlying belief?
Yeah, it is more about process than about facts, because the facts change and there's always new ones coming in, and so it's the process by which you are vetting your opinions that I think is crucial. And I think it's useful to ask yourself, and it's useful to ask someone you're arguing with, what would have to be true of the world for you to admit that you're wrong? Yeah. In what sense is your view on this topic falsifiable? And often there's no answer to that. Often there was, especially in the case of religion, you'll get people who actually sign on this dotted line. They'll say, there's absolutely nothing in the world of my experience that could change that would falsify my belief in Jesus, say. And if that's true, well then that's proof positive that it's actually not based on any engagement with the world of your experience.
Although what I'll hear sometimes, the people who will do that have true and unfalsifiable position, but they'll go then to personal experience. For example, Ray Comfort will tell you there's no way you could prove to him that Jesus doesn't exist because he's as real to Ray as his wife. And even when I tried to point out, you can introduce me to your wife and I can meet her and talk to her, right? You can't do that. It doesn't phase. And when not to continually use my mother as an example, sorry mom, not that she'll ever frickin' see this, but she will say she doesn't care about the Bible. She doesn't, or well, she does, but she doesn't care if you can point out problems with it. Doesn't care about philosophical arguments. Doesn't care about the logical arguments. She sees Jesus working in her life every day. And even if I were to try to go down the route of, I'm willing to accept that you have experiences that you are claiming and attributing to Jesus, I just wonder what the justification is for that. That has no impact on her. It may be me, that I should never have these conversations with my mom. But that's the path that it often goes down when they start seeing this doubt mechanism coming in of, oh no, it couldn't be true because of this experience that I have. As skeptics, as critical thinkers, I don't know, in much the same way that I talked about perhaps not addressing the facts as much as the mechanisms, I think there's a value for a campaign to teach people to stop being so confident about their interpretation of their personal experiences. Because all of those seem to be an argument from ignorance. I experience this, I have no explanation for it, therefore it must be God, or therefore it's a ghost, or therefore this pill worked, or this whatever worked.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I think I have to confess that if I'm asked what it would take to falsify my non-belief in God, or what it would take to convince me of anything supernatural, I find it very hard. I used to think it'd be easy. God would appear in clouds and chariots of fire and things.
Well, that's a start, isn't it?
I used to think that, but I mean, I've seen so many good conjuring tricks where you absolutely swear blind it's supernatural, and yet we know it's a trick.